Hey guys, it's Graham. What's cracking? Welcome back to another midnight ride. I'm on my way to work, and I'm going to officially declare this Movie Monday. Let's talk about 2011's Real Steel, directed by Shawn, I'm going to go with Levy, I think is how you say his name, starring the likes of Hugh Jackman, Evangeline Lilly, and to a lesser extent, Anthony Mackie, and Kevin Durand. That makes this movie a second-hand superhero story because, whether it was before or after it was made, several of the characters in it were superheroes in either a Marvel or a DC or whatever type thing. It was a fun game I used to play with my friends. It was also a lot more fun back when there were fewer of these movies and everybody in Hollywood hadn't been in one of them, but I digress. Real Steel is, I think, loved less than it deserves. It's based on a short story written by Richard Matheson. That's the same guy who wrote, what did he call his original story? I Am Legend. This is one that's been adapted by Hollywood several times into film and TV projects, never faithfully, I might add. I believe it was branded once in the 70s or 80s as The Omega Man, starring Charlton Heston. The real story is just about a guy who locks himself in his house during a vampire apocalypse until he's the last man on Earth. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about Steel. Now, this was written in the mid-20th century when boxing was still the gentleman's sport and was immensely more popular than the big four sports today, or the big five if you want to count soccer. It's set in a future from that point where robot boxing has replaced human boxing. And I read the short story once. I can't remember how it ends. I do know that it was adapted to a Twilight Zone episode, which ended on kind of a cliffhanger. It was one of those, let's just do a sad cliffhanger type thing. It was these two guys who were down on their luck, on their bottom dollar. They'd managed to find a fight for their junky old robot. And right before the fight, the robot broke. Now, keep in mind, this is black and white Twilight Zone TV technology, so their version of a robot was just a human being with weird face makeup that didn't have to emote and barely had to act. And they'd give him commands, and he'd pretend to move like a robot and throw jabs and stuff. So, since that was the case and their robot broke, they basically dressed up one of the one of the team member guys and sent him into the ring against an actual robot, and he had to throw punches and take punches and just do what he could to finish the fight. And he got tuned up, and that was how the story ended. It was like, oh, can I go back out there? I don't know if I can go back out there. He was considering his own mortality at that point, and that's where the story fades out. This then is a rare case of Hollywood taking an idea and doing something much better with it than what was originally on the page. Granted, there wasn't a whole lot to work with, so if the entire pitch of the story was robot boxing in the future, they could kind of do whatever they wanted. I remember going to see this movie with my wife in the theaters. This was back in a time when we went to the movies a lot more often. Part of it was because we were early in our marriage. We didn't have kids yet. We had this thing called disposable income. And the other part of it was that more good movies just came out on the regular, and they were affordable, and it wasn't crazy bonkers to just go see a random movie on an off weekend, one that wasn't like a tent-pole flick. I think this one came out in November of 2011. So, not exactly the big busy time of year for films. But in this one, Jackman's character, Charlie, is a washed-up boxer. He used to do it the old-fashioned way before the sport gave way to robot boxing. In this one, the robots are like 8, 9, 10 feet tall. They've got big, colorful paint jobs and personalities, and you can pretty much get a fight anywhere. If you've got a robot, you can do some junker amateur fight, make a few $100 in bets, and then if the plot demands it, you can get a league fight. Side note, I thought it was hilarious that these league fights were sponsored by the likes of Sprint and Bing. a telecoms company that was bought by T-Mobile and a search engine that has always had bigger aspirations than its capabilities. But I digress. Things come to a head for Charlie when he finds out that an old flame of his, he knew that they had a kid together, but he left this kid when he was about a year old. He's got to suddenly take custody of the kid because the old flame died. Now there are a bunch of legal complications, but the old flame's sister and her wealthy husband want to take the kid in, and Charlie, who's a compulsive gambler, sees a chance to get some money out of this dude. Blah blah blah, contrivance happens, but it works very well for what happens in the story. He's able to buy a robot, which he then immediately trashes in a fight. I can admit that the first act of this movie was kind of painful to watch, just because it felt like a very real and visceral portrayal of somebody with a gambling problem, somebody who was able to just light himself on fire over and over, and like, oh, he can go up big and then he can crash big, like, oh, I got 50 grand. Oh, I'm in the hole. Oh, I've got this fight. All right, well, I'll bet 20 grand on it that I don't have. If I lose, I'll just flee. It's like it's painful to watch, but the story then on the side becomes about him climbing out of that hole and paying his debts to various people, not least of which is his son, as they pull a robot out of a junkyard and put it back together and get it some fights and start making some real money. He starts to find his own purpose in life and starts to make up the damage that he did by abandoning his son, 10 years ago. So really, this is a positive story about fatherhood, about redemption, about atonement, about all the things that are, personally important to me, and they're portrayed very well and very endearingly in this story. The comedy beats, the humor beats, the heart beats, like it's all there. It's all done very well. I went and looked at Shawn Levy's film list and directing credits and stuff before. In the 90s, he was doing family TV, like Nickelodeon stuff. He directed a few Animorphs episodes, that bad TV show on Nickelodeon. I guess he directed the Night at the Museum movies. He's got some good credits under his belt, and he's obviously got a particular motif and style that works very well, and it fit this movie tremendously. I liked Evangeline Lilly's performance. She brought a really good screen presence for the character that she needed to play. Her late father had owned a boxing gym, and so she needed to look and act like a girl who had grown up around boxing and around machines, like a girl who could be feminine but could fit into a masculine world. Like, she's always had this really athletic fit to whatever role that she's in. She's like, okay, she looks like she's got some physicality to her, but she's still very feminine. You put her in a little black dress, you're like, oh, okay, she's got that aspect of the character down. But she can also stand up for herself without having to basically pretend to be a man, as these characters are often written. I mentioned Kevin Durand. He had also been in a movie with Hugh Jackman just a few years before this one. They were in that X-Men Origins movie. He was the Blob. And he was also a veteran of Lost, like Evangeline Lilly. So there was some cross-contamination of previous works amongst these projects. If I remember right, there was also that 2010 Robin Hood movie with Russell Crowe. And I think Shawn Levy directed that one. Kevin Durand was in that one as well. He was Little John. So just one of those cases, it makes sense that directors would want to reuse actors that they'd worked with before. And I think Shawn Levy had worked with Jackman on a couple of other things. So he brought in people that he was familiar with, and they all worked really well together. And the script was strong. The direction was great. The special effects have held up really well. There were only a couple of scenes where it was like, oh, okay, here's this robot standing next to a dude, but that robot is very obviously not there. It seemed like there were some practical effects, but honestly, I couldn't tell too much of a difference. And now 13 years later, the film holds up really well. I've got a DVD of it for Christmas, and I watched it with my kids a couple of weeks ago. and they loved it. My son just really, really gets into movies like this. And when the final fight was happening between Adam and Zeus, I nudged my wife and said, "Hey, look at him." And she looks over, and he's shadow boxing along with him in the final fight, just totally getting into it. I think that's a key component of great cinema, especially at a young age. Like, it's got to instill that sense of wonder. The story is about wholesome values and stuff, but if a kid can really get immersed in and lost in this story, and see himself in there, not in the representation way, but like see this as like I could walk into this and be a part of it. It's not that any of the characters have to be me, it's that I can be me in this thing. Like that's fantastic. I remember being his age and being an avid daydreamer and getting lost for days in fantasies about a movie I'd seen, and just it did wonders for me, and I'm glad to see it manifesting in my kids as well. So if you never got around to seeing that one, I guess one of the advantages of movies being expensive and not as good as they used to be is that you can catch up on old stuff that you might have missed the first time around. So go check out Real Steel with Hugh Jackman, Evangeline Lilly et al. And until next time, drive safe. See you out there.